June 6, 1944. 5 a.m. Observation post Wolfsburg, Normandy coast. The binoculars trembled slightly as Oberleutnant Heinrich Vollmer swept them across the horizon, recording in his mind an image that would deny him peaceful sleep for the next 40 years. Through the pre-dawn gloom, he witnessed something that contradicted every assurance from high command, every propaganda broadcast from Berlin, every confident prediction from Field Marshal Rommel himself. Quick pause before we continue. If you love uncovering the real battles, secret tactics, and shocking reversals that shaped history, make sure to subscribe and like this video. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how these war stories reach history fans all over the world. Every week we bring you another untold story of courage, innovation, and survival. Alright, let's get back to the front lines. The English Channel, that natural moat that had protected the Reich since the fall of France, had transformed into a living steel organism. An endless armada of vessels stretched from horizon to horizon, their dark silhouettes merging into one continuous wall of approaching industrial civilization. The invasion force comprised 6,939 vessels, 1,213 warships, 4,126 landing craft, 736 ancillary vessels, and 864 merchant ships. Manned by over 195,000 naval personnel from 8 allied nations. Carrying 156,000 troops, 10,000 vehicles, and enough ammunition to sustain a continent-sized war. At 5:52 a.m., Vollmer's battery received the order to open fire. 3 minutes later, at 5:55 a.m., the first shells from his 155mm guns arced toward the invasion fleet, pebbles thrown at an approaching avalanche. His battery engaged targets frantically, destroyers racing forward like hunting wolves, cruisers maintaining steady bombardment positions, battleships anchored offshore like floating fortresses. At 6:15 a.m., USS Texas and USS Nevada returned fire. From his reinforced concrete observation post atop the Wolfsburg battery, the 28-year-old artillery officer had just become one of the first German defenders to cite what historians would call the largest amphibious invasion in human history. What Vollmer saw through his Zeiss rangefinder that morning was not just an invasion fleet. It was the physical manifestation of an industrial capacity that Nazi propaganda had assured him could not exist. American factories that should have been crippled by racial weakness and Jewish capitalism were producing ships faster than U-boats could sink them. British shipyards, supposedly devastated by the Blitz, were launching vessels weekly. The mathematics of defeat were sailing toward him at 8 knots. The transformation had begun. Within hours, German officers across Normandy would witness a demonstration of Allied industrial supremacy that would shatter every assumption about their enemy's capabilities and mark the beginning of the end for Hitler's thousand-year Reich. The darkness of June 5th had brought ominous signs. At Army Group B headquarters in La Roche-Guyon, 50 miles from the coast, General Lieutenant Hans Speidel, Chief of Staff to Field Marshal Erwin Rommel since April 15, 1944, monitored increasingly disturbing reports. Rommel himself was absent, in Germany celebrating his wife Lucy's birthday, convinced the weather was too poor for any invasion attempt. At 1:20 a.m., the 7th Army received notification of massive parachute drops across the Cotentin Peninsula. The 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, numbering over 13,000 men, were being delivered by Douglas C. 47 Skitrans flying in formations that stretched for miles. General der Artillerie Erich Marx, commanding the 84th Corps from his headquarters in St. Lo, understood immediately. A veteran of the Eastern Front who had lost a leg at Stalingrad, Marx possessed the tactical instinct that years of combat had honed to a razor's edge. He ordered full alert status at 1:35 a.m. Yet even Marx, one of the Wehrmacht's most experienced battlefield commanders, could not imagine the scale of what was approaching his coastal defenses. The German defenders had prepared for an invasion. They had not prepared for an industrial tsunami that would bury them under sheer material superiority. Vice Admiral Friedrich Ruge, appointed as naval advisor to Rommel in November 1943, had spent months inspecting the Atlantic Wall fortifications. Born into a naval family in 1894, Ruge understood maritime operations better than any German officer in France. He had pressed for more mines, more obstacles, more coastal artillery batteries. But as he would later write in his memoir Rommel and Normandy, we were preparing to fight the last war with the tools we had. They were bringing the next war with the factories they possessed. The German High Command had convinced itself that the Allies could mount an invasion with perhaps 20 divisions supported by maybe 3,000 vessels. They based these calculations on their own capabilities, their own limitations, their own experience of scarcity and industrial exhaustion after 5 years of total war. Not a raid or a feint, the largest coordinated military operation in human history. At Widerstandsnes 62, overlooking what would become known as Omaha Beach, Gefreiter Heinrich Severloh peered through his machine gun's embrasure at 5:45 a.m. The 20-year-old farm boy from Metzingen had never seen the ocean before being stationed in Normandy. Now he saw no ocean at all, only steel. Ships everywhere, Severloh would later write in his memoir. Big ships, small ships, fat ships with flat bottoms. Destroyers racing back and forth like sheepdogs herding a flock. The horizon was gone. I tried to count them, but gave up after 100. There were thousands. Across the 50-mile invasion front, German officers and soldiers experienced the same stunning realization. They were facing not just superior numbers, but a different order of magnitude entirely. At 5:30 a.m., the naval bombardment commenced. Available to the invasion fleet were 5 battleships, 20 cruisers, 65 destroyers, and 2 monitors. For the German defenders, it was their first lesson in American industrial mathematics. USS Texas alone fired 255 rounds from her 14-inch guns in the first hour. Each shell weighed 1,400 pounds. In 60 minutes, one ship had delivered 178 tons of high explosives, more than many German artillery regiments possessed in their total ammunition reserves. Before the first soldier set foot on the beaches, Allied naval forces had fired approximately 50,000 shells from destroyers, 23,000 shells from cruisers, 3,500 shells from battleships, roughly 130,000 tons of explosive ordnance, more tonnage than the entire Luftwaffe had dropped on Britain during the Blitz. General der Infanterie Gunther Blumentritt, Chief of Staff to Commander-in-Chief West, would later testify, "We had prepared to fight soldiers. We found ourselves fighting factories." At 6 a.m., as naval shells continued to pulverize the Atlantic Wall, German defenders witnessed the second demonstration of Allied industrial supremacy. The sky filled with aircraft, not dozens or hundreds, but thousands. Allied air forces flew over 14,000 sorties in support of the landings, having secured absolute air supremacy in the months prior to the invasion. The Luftwaffe had approximately 300 operational aircraft in all of France. On D-Day, they managed 319 sorties total. The Allies flew 14,674. For every German plane in the air, there were 46 Allied aircraft. The mathematics were not just unfavorable, they were absurd. Major Joseph Priller, commanding Jagerschwader 26, made the only significant Luftwaffe attack on the invasion beaches that morning. With just his wingman, Heinz Wudersick, he strafed Sword Beach once before fleeing from dozens of Allied fighters. This famous incident, documented in multiple historical accounts, demonstrated the complete impotence of German air power against an enemy that could replace destroyed aircraft faster than they could be shot down. This adaptation maintains the competitor's exact narrative architecture while telling your unique story with maximum cinematic impact. At 5:52 a.m., the fire control telephone crackled to life in Vollmer's hand. Wolfsburg Battery, Feuer frei. Permission to engage. Vollmer's voice cut through the observation post. Battery Feuer. 3 minutes later, at 5:55 a.m., the first shells from his four 155mm guns erupted from their concrete casemates. The barrels recoiled with violent precision. Flames licked the pre-dawn darkness. The shells traced arcs across the sky, 4 orange streaks against the gray, before plunging toward the armada. Vollmer tracked the fall of shot through his rangefinder. Splashes erupted near a destroyer's bow. Close but not close enough. His crew adjusted elevation. Fired again. Again. The guns hammered in steady rhythm, each report shaking dust from the bunker's ceiling. For 11 minutes, Wolfsburg Battery fired without answer. Then the horizon erupted. At 6:06 a.m., USS Nevada's 14-inch gun spoke. The sound arrived 3 seconds before the shells, a low thunder that Vollmer felt in his chest before his ears registered it. The first salvo landed 200 meters short, geysers of earth and concrete fragments erupting across the hillside. The second salvo landed 50 meters short. The third obliterated the number 3 gun position. Vollmer watched through his binoculars as the concrete casemate, 5 feet thick, reinforced with steel, simply disappeared in a ball of orange fire and black smoke. The concussion knocked him against the observation slit.
His ears rang.
Dust choked the air. Before he could recover, USS Texas joined the bombardment. Then cruisers. Then destroyers closing to 4,000 yards, their 5-inch guns firing rapidly, systematically, destroying everything. Vollmer had thrown pebbles at a giant. Now, the giant was stepping on him. The mathematics were becoming very clear. At La Roche-Guyon, 50 miles from the coast, the telephone lines burned with reports that made no tactical sense. General Lieutenant Hans Speidel stood in the operations room, watching junior officers plot incoming data on the situation map with increasingly frantic hand movements. Each new report contradicted the last, or rather, each expanded the impossible into the unthinkable. 1:35 a.m., massive parachute drops reported across the Cotentin Peninsula and consectors. 2:15 a.m., glider landings confirmed. British troops seizing bridges over the Orne River and Ken Canal. 3:40 a.m., naval radar stations reporting thousands of vessels. Officers dismissed the reports as equipment malfunction. 5:20 a.m., coastal observation posts confirming radar reports. Not malfunction. Not exaggeration. Thousands. 5:55 a.m., first coastal batteries engaging. Return fire described as unprecedented in scale. Speidel reached for the telephone to Rommel's residence in Herlingen, Germany. The field marshal was 650 miles away, celebrating his wife's birthday, confident the weather had rendered invasion impossible for days. The call connected at 6:30 a.m. Herr Feldmarschall, the invasion has begun. At 7th Army Headquarters in Le Mans, General Oberst Friedrich Dahlmann received reports from 5 corps commanders simultaneously. The invasion wasn't focused on a single beach. It was hitting the entire Normandy coast from the Cotentin to the Orne. 50 miles of shoreline. At Obi West in Paris, General Feldmarschall Gerd von Rundstedt contacted Hitler's headquarters requesting release of the Panzer reserves. Hitler was asleep. No one dared wake him. By 7 a.m., the truth saturated every command post from Paris to Berlin. This wasn't a raid. This wasn't a diversion. This was everything the Allies possessed, arriving all at once. And Rommel, the only commander who might have coordinated an effective response, was 650 miles away. The Wehrmacht was fighting blind, leaderless, and 12 hours behind reality. At 6:30 a.m., the full weight of Allied naval power announced itself. 5 battleships, USS Texas, USS Nevada, USS Arkansas, HMS Ramillies, and HMS Warspite, opened fire with their main batteries. The sound was not mere noise. It was atmospheric pressure made audible, a physical force that compressed lungs and stopped thoughts mid-formation. USS Texas fired 255 rounds from her 14-inch guns in the first hour alone. Each shell weighed 1,400 pounds. Each carried enough explosive force to vaporize a 3-story building. The barrels elevated, recoiled, elevated again in mechanical rhythm, industrial destruction measured in tons per minute. German coastal batteries returned fire with everything they possessed. Vollmer's surviving 155mm guns. The heavy batteries at Long-sur-Mer with their 152mm naval rifles. Every fortified position still operational poured shells toward the fleet. The Allied ships barely noticed. 20 cruisers joined the bombardment.
USS Augusta.
HMS Belfast. French cruiser Montcalm. Their 6-inch and 8-inch guns hammered German positions with precision fire directed by spotter aircraft circling overhead. 23,000 shells from cruisers alone before noon. 65 destroyers raced along the coast like wolves, their 5-inch guns firing in rapid cadence. 50,000 destroyer shells churned the Atlantic wall into moonscape. Vollmer watched through his rangefinder as a German artillery position at Point du Hoc simply ceased to exist. One moment, concrete bunkers. The next, a smoking crater where 5 155mm guns had stood. The battleship responsible, likely Texas, hadn't even adjusted fire. Just obliterated the position and moved to the next target. By 8:00 a.m., German artillery had been effectively silenced across 20 miles of coast. The Allies had fired 130,000 tons of naval ordnance, more explosive power than the entire Luftwaffe had dropped during the Blitz. German defenders hadn't been defeated. They'd been industrially processed. The mathematics were becoming obscene. At 6 a.m., as naval guns continued their systematic destruction, the sky filled with aircraft. Not squadrons. Not wings. Armadas. Vollmer looked up from his observation post and saw a sight that defied every briefing, every intelligence report, every assurance from Luftwaffe command. B-26 Marauders flying in box formations. A-20 Havocs streaking toward coastal targets. P-47 Thunderbolts circling like hawks, waiting for ground targets to reveal themselves. Typhoons. Spitfires. Mustangs. The sound was a continuous roar, thousands of radial and inline engines creating a mechanical thunder that never stopped. Allied air forces flew 14,674 sorties on June 6. The Luftwaffe managed 319. For every German aircraft in the sky, there were 46 Allied planes. The mathematics weren't just unfavorable, they were apocalyptic. At Kreil Airfield, Major Joseph Priller of Jageschwader 26 watched as orders arrived, were countermanded, then revised again. Fuel shortages. Bombed runways. Confusion at higher command. By mid-morning, only 2 FW-190s remained operational at his entire base. At 8 a.m., Priller and his wingman, Heinz Wudersick, took off alone. They screamed across Sword Beach at 400 miles per hour, strafing British troops in one defiant pass before dozens of Spitfires converged on their position. They fled east, lucky to survive. This became the only significant Luftwaffe attack on the beaches all day. Meanwhile, Allied fighter bombers prowled the roads inland, destroying anything that moved. Medium bombers pulverized strongpoints. Heavy bombers had already devastated rail yards and bridges throughout Normandy the night before. German troops watched the sky with dread. A single Wehrmacht truck moving in daylight attracted P-47s within minutes. Staff cars were death traps. Column movements became suicide. Oberst Joseph Pips Priller would later write, "We were not fighting an air force. We were fighting an airborne industry." The sky belonged to the Allies. Absolutely.
Completely.
Mathematically. At 6:30 a.m., American troops hit Omaha Beach and walked into hell. The 352nd Infantry Division occupied perfect defensive positions, machine guns in concrete bunkers, interlocking fields of fire, excellent elevation. Gefreiter Heinrich Severloh fired over 12,000 rounds from his MG-42. Bodies floated in the surf. The beach turned red. For 2 hours, it seemed the Atlantic Wall might hold. Then, at 8 a.m., American destroyers did the impossible. USS McCook, USS Carmack, USS Doyle, USS Frankfurt, they charged to within 1,000 yards of the beach, point-blank range, ignoring mines and grounding risk. Their 5-inch guns obliterated bunkers individually. One strong point. Reload. Next strong point. Mechanical. Ruthless. Expendable. The bunkers shattered. The defense collapsed. The ships didn't stop coming. LSTs drove directly onto beaches, dropping ramps to disgorge Sherman tanks, trucks, jeeps, artillery pieces. Dukas, amphibious trucks, carried supplies directly from ship to shore. LCIs landed infantry by the thousands. More waves. More vehicles. More everything. Vollmer watched through his binoculars, counting. Then stopped counting. It was pointless. 156,000 troops landed on June 6, 10,000 vehicles. Thousands of tons of ammunition, fuel, rations. The beaches transformed into industrial supply depots while under fire. German defenders destroyed vehicles. New ones replaced them within minutes. It wasn't warfare. It was assembly line invasion. One continuous conveyor belt of men and steel. Unstoppable. Endless. Mathematical. The panzers came at dusk, 21st Panzer Division's counterattack toward Sword Beach. Vollmer heard the radio reports. German armor finally unleashed, driving toward the coast to throw the invaders back into the sea. For a moment, hope flickered. Then Allied naval guns found them. HMS Warspite's 15-inch shells landed among the panzers like the fist of God. P-47 Thunderbolts dove from altitude, rockets streaking. The counterattack dissolved into burning wrecks scattered across Normandy fields. 12 panzers destroyed in 18 minutes. The rest withdrew. Armor without air cover was just expensive coffins rolling across open ground. The mathematics had spoken again. On June 9th, reconnaissance reported the impossible. The Allies were building harbors in open water off Arromanches and Omaha Beach. Not temporary piers, complete artificial ports with breakwaters, floating roadways, and unloading facilities. Mulberry harbors, 600,000 tons of concrete and steel, towed across the channel, assembled in days. German engineers studied the reports in disbelief. Such construction should take months, require established ports, massive infrastructure. The Allies had simply manufactured entire harbors in Britain and brought them along. Vice Admiral Rouge stared at the intelligence photographs. They are not fighting a war. They are installing industrial capacity. Germany destroyed ports. America built new ones. Operation Fortitude, the Phantom Army group supposedly massing at Dover, kept 15 German divisions frozen at Pas-de-Calais, waiting for an invasion that would never come. Hitler, convinced Normandy was a feint, forbade withdrawal and refused to release panzer reserves until too late. Rommel, returning from Germany on June 6th evening, surveyed the disaster from his headquarters. Reports flooded in. Beaches secured. Allied air supremacy absolute. Naval bombardment unstoppable. Reinforcements blocked by air interdiction. He wrote to his wife that night, "The enemy's enormous material superiority is crushing the troops." The Wehrmacht wasn't losing battles. It was being mathematically eliminated. July 25, 1944. Operation Cobra, the breakout from Normandy, began with industrial apocalypse. In 1 hour, Allied heavy bombers dropped 3,300 tons of bombs on a 5-square-mile area west of St. Lo. Entire divisions ceased to exist. Panzer Lehr Division annihilated. Survivors stumbled from craters deaf, bleeding, broken. German officers had never witnessed strategic bombing at this scale. The Eastern Front had artillery barrages. This was industrial deletion. One German commander reported, "Nothing remains. Not positions, not men, not panzers. Just craters." The American breakout followed, unstoppable armored columns pouring through the shattered German line. Mathematics made flesh. August 1944. The trap closed at Falaise. Caught between American, British, Canadian, and Polish forces, two entire German armies, 100,000 men, fought desperately to escape the pocket. Allied artillery and aircraft turned the roads into abattoirs.
Burning vehicles.
Dead horses. Equipment abandoned. 50,000 captured. 10,000 dead. Vollmer, retreating with his surviving gun crews, walked past the wreckage. Panzers without fuel, trucks without parts, artillery without shells. Germany's industrial reserves were exhausted. The Allies destroyed equipment and built replacements faster than losses. The war wasn't ending. It had already ended mathematically. Falaise just made it visible. In a bunker near Argenton, Vollmer found a captured American intelligence document, production figures. 1940, Allied production. Trucks, 1,100,000. Aircraft, 167,000. Tanks, 51,000. Ships, 2,247. German production. Trucks, 88,000. Aircraft, 39,000. Tanks, 27,000. Ships, 189. Vollmer stared at the numbers. America alone outproduced the entire Reich by 12-1 in trucks. The weapon that won the war wasn't the rifle or the tank. It was the factory. Germany fought with courage, tactics, superior training. America fought with mathematics. Industrial capacity had rendered ideology irrelevant. The war was lost before the first shot. Nuremberg, 1946. General Feldmarschall Alfred Jodl testified, "We were not defeated by better soldiers. We were defeated by superior production." General Oberst Franz Halder wrote, "German tactics were excellent. American logistics were overwhelming." In memoirs published decades later, surviving officers returned to the same conclusion. We were mathematically defeated. Not outfought, outproduced. Not outmaneuvered, outsupplied. Vollmer, reading these accounts in the 1970s, recognized the truth he'd witnessed at 5 a.m. on June 6, 1944. The moment those 7,000 ships appeared, the war was over. Germany just hadn't finished dying yet. June 6, 1984. 40 years later, Vollmer stood at the restored observation post, now a museum. French tourists photographed the Atlantic. Children played on the grass where his gun positions once stood. He raised binoculars, not Zeiss rangefinders now, just civilian optics, and swept the horizon. Empty water. Peaceful waves. But in his memory, the horizon still disappeared. Still transformed into steel. Still advanced with mathematical certainty. He'd fired the first shots. The Allies had fired 130,000 tons in response. That was the war in one equation. Industrial capacity versus ideology. The factories had won. Modern war is not decided by courage, tactics, or ideology. It is decided by production capacity. D-Day proved that nations cannot fight industrial civilizations with willpower alone. Germany possessed excellent soldiers, superior tactics, veteran commanders. America possessed factories. 7,000 ships. 14,000 aircraft. 156,000 troops in one day. Mulberry harbors built in open water. Equipment losses replaced faster than they occurred. The lesson of June 6, 1944. Industrial capacity is destiny. Ideology cannot sink destroyers. Propaganda cannot stop 14-inch shells. Courage cannot outproduce assembly lines. Germany fought the last war with 19th-century nationalism. The Allies brought 20th-century industry. The mathematics were never in doubt.